He just opened the sound of the toy and instantly plunged his family into panic. My father ran towards him like a madman, constantly wary of things in the forest. Watching the child die tragically, the mother covered her mouth in pain but dared not make any sound. The unexpected passing of his youngest son left Lee in endless sorrow. With this tragic lesson, the family became even more cautious. Lee was surrounded by surveillance cameras, constantly monitoring the monster's movements. He tried to seek help from the survivors, but in the end, he was disappointed and crossed out the number. Every time Lee goes out to search for supplies, he will cover the road with sand. The family lives cautiously and doesn't dare to make any noise while eating. The siblings were playing games silently when they accidentally knocked over the oil lamp. Lee immediately grabbed a blanket and quickly extinguished the flames. However, the sound just now made him more alert. He tiptoed to the bed, afraid of attracting the monster's attention. Lee cautiously looked up and suddenly let out a roar. Seeing only 2 raccoons, the family finally breathed a sigh of relief. However, no one expected that the monster had actually arrived outside. They endured a difficult year and soon encountered new troubles. Evelyn's belly is getting bigger and bigger, and it's almost due date. In order to welcome the birth of a new life, they have covered the delivery room with newspapers. Even the crib has been made into a soundproof box, and then used oxygen cylinders to ensure the baby's breathing. On this day, Lee went out to search for supplies and wanted to take his son to experience it. Thinking of his brother's tragic situation, his son immediately shrank back. He grabbed his mother's hand and wanted her to plead for him, but her mother solemnly told him that this was a necessary experience for survival in the afterlife. There's no way, my son can only reluctantly come outside. Just as he tried to pass the buck, his daughter stepped forward and volunteered to take the initiative. However, he suffers from congenital hearing impairment and is often unaware of making noises. Lee dare not take risks and can only advise him to stay and take care of his mother. He couldn't accept his own uselessness and ran back to the room in anger. However, right by his bedside, he saw his father using a hearing aid and lightly tapping his fingers. The girl finally heard the sound, and he instantly collapsed. Tears welled up in his eyes, so he packed his things and left home alone. He walked silently along the path, standing at the bridgehead where his younger brother was killed. At first, my younger brother fell in love with a toy plane and was immediately stopped by his father. However, because he couldn't hear any sound, he quietly stuffed the plane back into my younger brother's seat. It was because of this plane that my younger brother passed away, causing him endless self-blame. Lee brought his son to the river and caught a small fish from the cage. However, just as he was about to hand it over to his son, the fish suddenly jumped out and made a noise, which immediately startled his son. He was afraid that the monster would follow the sound, but his father encouraged him to be brave. The sound of the river is loud enough to ensure the safety of the 2 people. Lee brought his son to the waterfall and asked him to boldly shout a few times, then let out a shout, which immediately startled his son. With the father's assurance, the son finally mustered up the courage. He let out a howl at the waterfall, finally getting a moment to relax. The father and son walked through a forest and suddenly saw a strange old man. The old man's spirit broke down, and it was obvious that he no longer wanted to live. At this moment, the son realized that the monster had killed his wife. Lee suddenly realized something was wrong and quickly signaled to him not to speak up. Lee hugged his son tightly and flew away to the distance, then hid behind a big tree, tightly covering his son's mouth. The monster's tearing and screaming still made the boy's scalp tingle. He dared not listen anymore and covered his ears in pain. Evelyn finished washing clothes at home and wanted to drag them outside alone to dry, but just as she was going upstairs, an iron nail hooked onto the bag. She tugged hard and suddenly made a tearing sound. Evelyn was too scared to breathe, afraid of attracting the monster's attention, but she never expected that tie ding would be pulled up. Evelyn was about to go downstairs and suddenly felt a burst of abdominal pain. She looked down and realized that she was about to give birth. She realized something was amiss and hurriedly walked into the silent room, but as she passed by the stairs, he accidentally stepped on a nail. 444. She dared not shout out loud, so she could only endure the excruciating pain and forcefully pull out the nail by breaking her foot. Evelyn limped towards the corner and immediately turned on the alarm light. But as he was about to go upstairs, the monster had already heard the sound and rushed over. She was frightened and quickly hid behind the pillar, then rummaged on the shelf for a while, finally getting an alarm clock. The excruciating pain from her body made Evelyn scream in pain all over her head. She took a deep breath and finally hid in the corner in time. When the monster came over, Evelyn was too nervous to breathe, but the unbearable pain still made her bite her finger. The monster opened its sharp ears and seemed to sense her movements. Fortunately, in a critical moment, the alarm rang in time. Taking advantage of the monster's distraction, Evelyn quickly ran upstairs. As soon as she hid in the bathtub, blood had already flowed out, but she could only endure the excruciating pain and dared not make any sound. Just as the child was about to be born, the father and son finally rushed back. When they saw that the yard was full of red lights, Lee immediately sensed the danger. They could no longer care too much and quickly ran back. Lee handed the flashlight to his son and asked him to find the purchased fireworks. He quietly returned to his room and took out the prepared shotgun. His son lit the fireworks, and his mother's patience had reached its limit by then. When Lee found his wife, he had already successfully completed the delivery. Seeing that his mother and son were safe, Lee finally breathed a sigh of relief. In order to avoid accidents, he quickly took the two of them to the soundproof room. However, halfway through, the baby burst into tears. He couldn't think much anymore and quickly covered the soundproof panel. Lee put an oxygen mask on the baby, put it in a soundproof wooden box, closed the lid, and everything finally quieted down. My son was rushing towards home when he suddenly heard a strange sound. He was frightened and quickly ran in the opposite direction. In his panic, he hit a tire head-on. Sister passed by the cornfield and happened to see her younger brother's flashlight. Just as she looked confused, the monster came behind her. That guy opened his ears, but resonated with the hearing aid. The noisy noise made the monster suffer unbearable pain. It shook its head and then quickly ran away. The girl followed the light and finally met her younger brother smoothly. They lit a bonfire and waited for rescue on the roof of the granary. After settling down his wife, Lee took a risk and climbed out of the soundproof room. He covered the baffle and walked carefully towards the outside. However, as soon as he left, water flowed towards the soundproof room. Just now, the monster's attack actually broke the water pipe at home. When Evelyn woke up, she was already surrounded by floods and the cover of the crib was opened, which immediately made her extremely nervous. She curled up and made an effort to observe inside the box. At this moment, she noticed that there was a monster hidden in the corner. Evelyn was trembling with fear, but still cautiously stepped into the water. However, at this moment, the monster also lurked down. In order to ensure the safety of the child, Evelyn trembled and approached the box. Fortunately, the child was safe and sound. She quickly picked up the child and in an instant, the monster surfaced at the same time. She was too scared to breathe and slowly retreated while holding the child. But the monster seemed to have heard it and chased after it closely. At a critical moment, a sudden sound came from outside, and Evelyn managed to escape and quietly rushed to the surveillance room. Lee was on his way to find his children when he suddenly saw a monster rushing towards him. It turned out that just now, the siblings were planning to go home on their own, but their son had just taken 2 steps when he stepped on the lid of the granary. He fell into a pile of corn and was rapidly sinking downwards. Unfortunately, at this moment, the door panel fell off again. Seeing my younger brother in danger, my sister quickly jumped down to help. She pushed the door panel all the way to his face. At the last moment, my younger brother climbed up smoothly, but the older sister used all her strength and sank quickly. Fortunately, the younger brother extended a helping hand in time, which pulled the older sister out. The two of them survived and hugged each other tightly. But at this moment, the monster had already heard the sound and the sister quickly flipped the door panel, covering the two of them in time. The resonance from the heavenly machine also made the monster restless. It left a huge claw mark and fled from here without looking back. Looking at the big hole on the wall, the siblings still have lingering palpitations. Fortunately, it wasn't too long before Lee finally found them. He asked the two of them to escape back into the car, while he grabbed a hoe himself. However, at this moment, the monster appeared behind him. The monster heard a sound and chased towards the siblings. It smashed through the glass and shook the car wildly. At the moment of crisis, Lee grabbed the hoe again and stood up forcefully, giving his daughter a firm look. He attracted the monster's attention with his own roar, while his son took the opportunity to put down the handbrake and slide all the way towards home. The mother and daughter reunited after the robbery and hugged each other in pain. However, before they could catch their breath, the monster chased after them again. They quickly fled into the room and used surveillance to observe the monster's tracks. My daughter saw her father's efforts on the experimental platform, and all the failed hearing aids displayed silent fatherly love. At this moment, a monster approached and its mother aimed a gun at it, but she hesitated to take the risk of shooting. The monster opened its ears to search for the sound of prey, and at this moment, the TV was disturbed, emitting a noisy roar. Looking at the restless monster, the girl suddenly noticed something. Overly keen hearing is undoubtedly the biggest weakness of monsters. The girl endured discomfort and the disturbed monster was in excruciating pain. She immediately took off her hearing aid and pressed it directly onto the microphone. The maximum noise immediately made the monster's head blossom, and it struggled for a moment before it became completely silent. Upon hearing the sound here, more monsters rushed towards us. However, after identifying their weaknesses, the family was no longer afraid, and their daughter, who had the greatest impact, was ready for the final battle. To avoid missing out on more exciting movies, please click subscribe.